Hey, how you doing?
What's up, dude?
How do I look? How do I sound?
Background's great, audio's great.
Good.
Yeah, good to see you, man. So, little
Oh,
politics unraveled part due.
yeah. I was figuring next
Insurrection episode.
insurrection or terrorism or what do what do we call it?
Conspiracy. You know, man, it has been a fascinating year. This past year on into 2021. But I know that you spoke on the local news recently. What was that? One of the Little Rock stations, I believe it was, Channel
Yep.
5. And what can you give us kind of a play-by-play of kind of what you talked about on there just to kind of get the ball rolling?
Um so this was in response to the Capitol incursion. I guess that was January 6th if I've got my dates right. Um I started off by talking about when you study American politics, there have been, we love a good protest. There's always protests in Washington, D.C., there's always protests in what they call the mall between the Washington Monument and the Capitol building. And all those things are right there amongst one another. Um, there's even been violent protests. Like the example I used was the Democratic Convention of 1968.
Yes.
You got I think I'll give the network credit. They pulled images and they showed, paddy wagons lined up and dragging protesters. What made this unique is that effectively Congress meeting to certify the election is the very last step. It's ceremony, it's pomp and circumstance. It's not all that. It really honestly doesn't have anything to do. They show up, they do that weird little, these ballots appear to be authentic and things like that, and they certify the election. But there was a rally planned for the morning. That rally the president spoke at. Attendees of said rally went down, surrounded the Capitol building, eventually broke through barricades, stormed the building, all kinds of lawlessness and stuff, and delayed the proceedings. I think about, if I remember, it was about 9 or 9:30 our time in here in Arkansas. They got the process going again. And I think it was about 3 a.m. Arkansas time, they officially declared Joe Biden the president-elect, the next president of the United States. So that's the short of it.
So, and let me just inquire about this. So, I've been seeing some different narratives out there, right? So, for example, we'll talk about this just relative to people that don't know, outside of me being a student in your political science class growing up in college. We also trained jiu-jitsu together, and you helped teach martial arts classes at the gym and stuff. But are you familiar with Pat Miletich?
I think I should be. I don't know why.
Miletich Fighting Systems. I want to say he's even been on Joe Rogan, and he's also a Freemason, which is not, but he's been on some different podcasts. He's the commentator for Legacy.
Okay.
Right. So Cora had that fight on Legacy that one time.
Yeah. I didn't follow Joe Rogan to Spotify.
Me
if
either.
If he had somebody cool on when he was on YouTube, I'd watch that.
I believe he was on YouTube, but I could be recalling wrong, but it's relevant. Okay, so he was photographed at this rally that you're talking about in the morning.
Mhm.
And then he was released from his job as a promoter because the photos started circulating online.
Mm-hmm.
But then he shared photos of this rally and was like, no violence here, but it's like we saw otherwise.
Yeah.
With primary video footage. So I guess there are some conservatives that were maybe at this rally that are spinning this other narrative. Do you know anything about alternate narratives around this event? I
Oh,
don't.
yes. I've caught bits and pieces. This is what's going to be tricky for law enforcement. We know more than 1,000 people entered that building. There are some who went there with criminal intent to kill people. If you see these pictures, there's some dude, he's in full tactical gear. He's got like flex cuffs, like the whole 9 yards, and he's carrying firearms. And those individuals, somebody has been arrested. Somebody has quoted, I went there to kill Democratic senators to prevent this election. Now, here's the trouble. That's one guy in more than 1,000. And that's why, you hear this event called a riot. There is some truth to that. Riots sweep people up in them in the moment all the time. But when you've got people breaking into offices, when you've got people trying to steal property, and even better, this is like, some of these are some of the dumbest criminals ever. Let's photograph me sitting at Nancy Pelosi's desk. Yeah, congratulations. When you're never back in Arkansas because you're in a federal penitentiary, have fun with that.
Let's point out also, did you see Woods's social media post early this morning?
Yes, the Conway gentleman who was arrested. A lot of this, that's where part of it is, it'll be interesting to see these people. Welcome to the surveillance society. It's not like your commentator. If all his pictures are him outside, he should be fine. If his pictures are inside the Capitol building,
which they're not.
No, but if you want a really good example of this, there's a YouTube channel called Legal Eagle. He's a DC lawyer. He talks about the law and the Constitution and stuff. He's been doing these little quick hit videos lately. And he's talking about like some of their defense attorneys are getting up there, and it's like, and he kind of like makes fun of them because the one he was talking about was the gentleman who was shirtless with the Viking helmet and the face paint. His lawyer is on the courthouse steps, saying, putting out a statement. He's like, this is the dumbest thing you could ever do. You're admitting in public this can be used as evidence against you that your client illegally entered a federal building. And he's like, never, any good defense attorney would say no comment and keep walking. But I think what's going to happen with the commentators and everybody is, there's so much photographic evidence, there's security cameras. They are going to piece together where you were. And I think there will be some differentiation between people who got swept up in a moment and those select few who really came with a violent agenda. And I think that's what are a lot of this, the challenge for like law enforcement is going to be. And it's not going to happen instantly. This might be something over the next 6 months.
I'm sure they're working overtime, sorting through all this. So we've got soldiers sleeping in the Capitol.
Taking breaks in the Capitol, yeah. But I caught that they've basically upped the armed security. The inauguration, I think there's 20,000 National Guardsmen. They've activated, we got an email today, they've activated some of our students. They're going to Little Rock. They're going to reinforce the Arkansas governor's mansion, the Arkansas legislature, and some of them are going to support actions in Washington, D.C. for the inauguration.
Wow.
Because they're not going to make the same mistake twice. But other things, like I know Airbnb canceled every reservation in the greater DC area for like 2 days before and 2 days after the inauguration.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's bizarre as to how far this has gone, and how quickly, and how violent.
What is the date of the inauguration?
Wednesday the 20th, I do believe, if I am not mistaken.
What are your concerns about that event? If something like this happened and just certifying election results, right? Like what you're saying, just sort of ceremonious thing that happens every time. I mean, and it's speculation purely, but I mean, there's obviously cause for concern about the inauguration, but
Yes.
but what kind of concern should we be having about that? I mean, I don't even think we should be doing it. Like,
Well,
you're in there, man. We'll do this later.
In practical purposes, you don't need a big public inauguration. Lyndon Johnson, I think, was inaugurated on Air Force One.
Yeah.
Just a quick Bible swear, a Supreme Court justice, and boom, you're the president. Given the circumstances, and oh, by the way, an ongoing pandemic probably would be a good way to go. I think the dangers at the inauguration have now been tampered down because of the slamming of the door of social media, and especially social media that caters to more radical conservative ideas. Particularly Parler is the one you've heard about. You've had My American Government. There is limits to free speech. Free speech on the internet is a completely new area. It is less defined, but if you are talking about committing violent acts against the sitting government, you don't, it's called sedition speech. It's one of the few speeches that's really sort of clearly agreed upon, where you don't really have the rights to say that. So I think closing, Parler, realizing that when Amazon hosts all your servers and you violate their terms of agreement, but you've seen, President Trump has been banned from Twitter. He's been banned from Facebook. YouTube shut his channel down for like a month at least. So I think in general, it's a lot of the tools that could make this worse have been cut off. There's still going to be challenges and problems, but I think it's better than it might have been.
Do you agree with those channels being turned off? I mean, a lot of people are really raising hell about censorship right now. And for example, not necessarily related, but the crazy Viking head guy, which was so great. But there's this video of him and he's like, because I am a shaman, I can see into the other dimensions where the pedophiles live. And he was saying crazy stuff. And I shared it. And I was like, look at this guy's a wook. I was like making a joke about people like that I see at concerts and festivals. But that video got taken down, and I do get some of people's concern about the amount of censorship. It's a bunch. There's a bunch of stuff going on all at once. I agree with most of it personally, but I have also had some concerns. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, again, this is a lot of U.S. free speech law, as I understand it, is written for like the newspaper and television age. The law is very slow to catch up. Like the one example I think I use in my classes is the like button on Facebook free speech.
Yeah, the question of should free speech, I guess, extend into
social
media,
yeah,
in the internet. But I guess that could maybe cover blog posts and all sorts of things like that, right?
Yes, but it's tricky. You know, part of it is to remember with all of these, they are privately owned companies. So they can set, you know, when's the last time you actually read all of your end user license agreements?
Never, not one time.
Yeah, nobody ever does. You know, terms of service. Now I've got like, you know, 4 YouTube videos or whatever. So I'll get a note of what I get from like YouTube is a notification. Hey, we changed X, Y, or Z, but I can't remember the last time I even attempted to read the whole thing. You know, and that's these. And here's the challenge. They don't charge you anything. They are free. So therefore, people have voluntarily signed up for these things. Now, in today's day and age, can you really be offline completely? That's a whole nother animal besides free speech. But the reality is you don't have a lot of protections from a free service you decided to go sign up for. You know,
and it can be used against you also.
Oh yeah, that's one's. We've seen it in politics. You know, somebody does. This is Mitt Romney's 47% comments, and hell, Donald. You know, candidate Trump's famous bus audio that came out. You know, 3 or 4 weeks before the 2016 election. Yeah, and employers have always had that ability. You know, if you go out there and you are saying something inflammatory, stupid, I think it actually, one I remember closer to home, there was a Little Rock area, like gym teacher, phys ed teacher, who was spouting off all kinds of these QAnon ideas and white supremacist ideas. And on Facebook at the time, this was probably about 2 years ago. But they got into a big fight with, can they terminate him for what he was saying on his personal Facebook? You know, so this is just a new twist to it. You know, but it's, again, you're talking about people are using these tools for violent revolutions, things of that nature.
So, you know, I've heard, and I do agree, you know, like you were saying, I like what you were saying, like, hey, there's 1,000 people that went in the building, and, you know, maybe they will be lenient on some of those people and they won't be deemed domestic terrorists. You know, those videos of people with who were getting put on the no-fly list and stuff, you know, that was wild. But, you know, a lot of people, mostly I would say liberal-minded folks, are calling for, you know, accountability, like, hey, punish these people. But I do, and I could be misperceiving this, but I do feel like some people are like, hey, if you were at that morning rally, you are complicit. You know, so I kind of like where you draw the line, but, you know, I do see other people drawing other lines in the sand. What are your thoughts on that, on just kind of where, you know, I've seen people fall a lot of places on who should be complicit and accountability and all that. So,
oh man, that is what deep philosophical question. I mean, you just went, I'll give you I can't give you an answer, but I'll give you parallels. Think about like what you had when World War II was over. You had Nazi leadership. And one of the things the victors, the United States and England, had to do is, so how far do we hold these individuals accountable? How high up do we hold? Hitler was dead. They captured a number of the senior generals. How far down into society do we go? But you've seen this in like Iraq when we invaded in 2003, Afghanistan 2001. You cannot, complicit. So do you go down to all 74 million people who voted Republican in 2020? No. Is it the 2,000 people who actually entered the Capitol grounds? Maybe. But that is one of the most difficult, that's the difficult question to answer is, organizers, planners, all those sorts of things. And that's where the debate becomes like the president's speech itself. He gave a speech that morning. How much do we hold him responsible for the actions that people followed? It's again, and that one actually there probably is much clearer law about, because he was there at a podium giving a speech to a live crowd, a mile from the Capitol building. Whereas, if he says it on Twitter, there's a lot more steps involved, et cetera, much more immediacy. Whereas if you're out there with a megaphone or a microphone on the stage, you can typically be held a lot more responsible for what you say and the actions of those taken by those after you say it. But I don't really have a great answer for that. I think that's when I've thought about the challenges of, I'm teaching American government. I'm actually in the process of re-recording a lot of my lectures and stuff. Like, one of the biggest challenges for the new Biden administration is how much to hold the Trump administration accountable for their actions. Because there is definitely shady dealings in the Trump presidency. There is stuff that gets into criminality. Mm-hmm. But what happens if you spend your entire year putting out and all you do in 2021 is investigate these previous efforts? You're not advancing your own agenda. You're not making the American people better. And it becomes the Biden administration has to be careful about creating their own version of the Benghazi ongoings. This was where Hillary Clinton was the Secretary of State. There was a request for more security. 4 individuals get killed in Libya. But it becomes like this, the entire good chunks of the Obama administration were taken up with Benghazi this and Benghazi that. So it becomes like, how do you deal with this from like a criminal perspective? How much time and effort do you spend in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of an economic downturn, saying, oh yes, the previous president did X, Y, and Z while in office, but I will say we've seen these debates go before. For instance, you've seen, well, that's more government policy, but I was just thinking, you have had questions about how people in American custody, like with the border agents, ICE, there were serious questions about how those detainees were being treated. And a lot of that fell on the head of ICE, the head of the Department of Homeland Security, et cetera. But this is in the private sector, the private side of things. But I think that untangling all of this in the first is going to be a real challenge. And I think that's going to be the trick of, the early Biden administration. If they put all 2,000 people or however many it was that stormed the Capitol in prison for 5 years, while that may be what the law says, that's going to look pretty harsh for somebody who just got caught up in the moment. Whereas some of those, again, the more clearly, the ones there to do destructive harm, to kill people, yeah, they need to go to prison, because they are, they're the ones who are really sort of sullying conservatives and sullying Republicans. 99.9% of conservatives and Republicans, they're great, fine people. But you've got this, 0.01% who came to the Capitol to murder in the president's name. And how you handle that is a huge and challenging question.
What can you say about the comments made by Trump about Mike Pence and that narrative of the riot?
The biggest things I've heard is that as far as Trump and Pence, basically President Trump pressured the vice president to stall or delay or not to certify this election. And basically Vice President Pence stood up and said no. because part of it is, Vice President Pence is a longtime politician. He is very conservative, but he has dealt with the law. He was in Congress. And he understood where the president did not. The president never won a legal case. If you sue 50, you have 50 opportunities to present in a court of law. Here is how this election was stolen. You had 50 opportunities. You never produced a single shred of evidence. His only victory, he lost 51 out of 52. You know what he won? 9 feet.
What do you mean by that? 9 feet.
Okay. The one case, one of the things in Pennsylvania, when they are counting ballots, there are Democrats and Republicans who watch the count. They observe the count. They make sure there's, nothing shady going on. They were required by Pennsylvania election law to be 15 feet away. The Trump administration argued that they needed to be closer. They had to be closer. The judge agreed with them. With the pandemic, they could be up to just 6 feet away. So they got to move 9 feet closer. That's the only victory he had in 3 months of election lawsuits. That's why I say, yes, you won 9 feet. But this is the difference. Those are all in the court of law. And for me, what I've been doing, because I just started American government this week, and you've got this, I called it the elephant in the room. You've had this riot. I've stuck to, you're talking, this is the first impression on a bunch of 18-year-olds. You can lose a class in the first, week easily. Stick to what we know. And what we know is the president's election campaign, not the Republican Party, their election campaign had more than 50 opportunities to present evidence in a court of law about election fraud or whatever it is. And they never did. They couldn't, now they've made arguments in the court of public opinion. They've had press conferences. Those don't carry the same weight. And just the reality is you've had this narrative going on since the election. I was cheated. I was lost. I think the one thing that really starting to worry me a bit is you're starting to get Republicans on Republican attacks. Conservative on conservative. Like Texas sued to have Pennsylvania's votes thrown out. Well, Texas is a Republican conservative state, and the state legislature is controlled by Republicans who made the laws for counting electoral votes. You've got Arkansas National Guardsmen now surrounding the Arkansas State Capitol building, which has nothing to do with any of this for potential inauguration violence. You're getting this group which is starting to eat itself, starting to attack, the left and the right are starting to attack each other within the Republican Party. So that's becoming pretty destructive fast. So, this is one I told my students, you just got to kind of hang back and you got to wait for things to develop. You're going to have, part of it is we don't even know the incoming attorney general, whoever is the attorney general for President Biden, will have a lot of say over this. He is effectively the country's lawyer, access to the FBI, their input in all of this lawlessness is going to be key going forward.
One thing I'm going to start doing a better job at for my U.S. courses is every time there's a change in president, I'm going to talk about their entire cabinet. And I usually make references to Secretary of State or Vice President, but it's never, with Washington, I do that. Mm-hmm. And I want to say, no, there's no other president that I lay out their cabinet except Washington. I'm like, here's the cabinet, this is fun. Even with Jackson, I talk about his kitchen cabinet and his cabinet, but that's something I'm going to do a better job at, because to see the political influence some of these people have, like Henry Clay, how many times that dude was Secretary of State, or how many in elections, who all runs in elections, like all the candidates.
Oh yeah.
And I do a better job at that, but those are things we can really, I think, develop understanding if we look at them.
Oh yeah, they are, and I think it's especially true with the Trump presidency. He was an outsider. He that was his shtick when he ran. I am not a professional politician. I've never held elected office, and he was going to be more reliant on those around him than, say a Bush 43, Obama, etc. So, Obama's a constitutional lawyer. He understands how the law, the legal system, the inside of a court, the courts work. So he has a, stronger grasp on that side of things. Especially though President Trump was never, and he never has been, a details guy. And if you want a parallel, this is the Ronald Reagan approach. I'm going to take a really bird's eye view. I want the country to do X, Y, and Z, and he would leave it to his cabinet officials to fill in the details. So I think, looking at those cabinet secretaries is important. Now, I'm not sure if you got to do all 24 of them. I'm not really sure in the grand scheme of things, Betsy DeVos, the outgoing Secretary of Education, matters as much. But there's certainly ones you look at, like you said, Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense always matter. Chief of Staff is a big one.
Well, and you said Attorney General, right?
Yes.
And that's a position too that is worth discussing when it's merited. I just need to, that's such a good lens of, as a historian, to pull out and look through, because man, just like I mentioned a second ago with Henry Clay, like that guy's political involvement from 1810 to 1850 is notable. Like to the extent, and if you lay it all out, you really see it's not just the three compromises, it's all the times he ran for president, and all the times he was on a ticket, and all the times he served in the cabinet, and so
on. I teach foreign policy classes as well, and that is an easier level because you have the National Security Council, which is a subset of the cabinet. It's Secretary of State, Defense, Chief of Staff, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, National Security Advisor. That little circle of advisors is pretty small. CIA head gets thrown in there. That's one that's like a nice self-contained unit for foreign policy, but is incredibly influential. So I think, there's certainly those cabinet secretaries are more important. Part of the reason I don't do more with them is time. I've got 18 chapters to cover in 14 weeks. And if there's something, you start thinking about, okay, what can I cut out? That unfortunately becomes one of the big, one of the ones getting into details, unless somebody does something that really helps push the story along or explains what's going on more. So it's always you're right. The cabinet would be great if you get into like a class on the presidency. I could see you doing a lot of time. If you would do how like it's U.S. History 1 before the Civil War.
That's what I primarily teach.
Yeah, if you would have like U.S. history from World War II to Vietnam, and then Vietnam to the present, if you split it from 2 classes for all of American history to say 4, then I think you really could get into it. I think, from my perspective, like teaching foreign policy, Vietnam, you're going to get into, Robert McNamara and a lot of those right around, particularly Lyndon Johnson. But you still, people forget Eisenhower was the first person to send advisors to South Vietnam. Now, I think it's like 300 when he gets started, but what did his cabinet say about efforts and stuff like that.
Yeah, that whole Cold War era, not just the 75, that's a good capstone for getting into Indochina and Vietnam, but um, I never got to take a class on just the Cold War, but that's that whole era. Is that kind of what you're saying is such a fascinating era because I don't really like 45 to present, like beyond the Cold War. Yeah, there's some things now. There's especially some things to talk about, more recent stuff to talk about, I suppose.
Mhm.
But the closer you get, I just feel like the less in depth we get to go, the closer we get to the present times. Like I stopped in 2012 for Arkansas history.
Mhm.
But I think you could do like, you capstone something like at the end of the Cold War. That's a really good period of study, which we've got a lot of analysis and a lot of sources and a lot of scholarship, reflection, and
Yeah, declassification is a big one for historians. Most of Reagan and Bush 41s, the dads, presidential papers are declassified. You can go read all of this stuff in memos and stuff. You'll get greater understanding. What were you thinking? Well, here's the paper trail. That's always a challenge. I, I I think we've had this discussion. Political science and history are different disciplines, but we're like first cousins. You
totally,
know,
totally.
I have to deal with 2021, but in some of my classes, you got to understand literally sometimes like 3,000 years of human history. If you're understanding what's going on, like we were talking about the idea of sovereignty in class on Thursday, you got to understand the power of, say, the Catholic Church from about like 400 AD till about 1400 AD, and to understand like the social contracts and Locke and Rousseau and Montesquieu and all that sort of stuff. But I'm trying to get to 2021 like really really fast. But that's the reality is that to understand like, well, why did the Republicans do this? That's a popular social media question. Well, you got to understand the last, like, honestly, you've got to start the story of what is a Republican, like with the Reagan Revolution. The Republican Party as we know it is what he built in the late 70s into the early 80s. And how he built it, but it's changed, it's evolved. The growth of like the Tea Party that came out of it. When did the Republican Party make its hard turn against immigration? When they become a nativist party? That sort of thing. It didn't magically happen all 3 weeks ago. It's something that has been a challenge. And the answer is somewhere between 2004 and 2006 is where you see a lot of this nativist side come out of parts, segments of the Republican Party.
Yeah, that is fascinating. And so, have you observed this? People keep wanting to, I mean, you're noting recent changes, right? And we could go back. Marie talked about changes when she was on our last podcast, the first Politics Unraveled episode we did. But Trump, his supporters, have wanted to say things like "Party of Lincoln," and
Oh
then
yeah.
too, there's these billboards in Conway that
Oh,
are. Yeah, I
I know
know.
which I know which two you're talking about. They are so historically context absent. Yes. Yep. Yeah. If you
It
were,
blows my mind.
oh yes, yeah. It's the use and abuse of history.
Totally.
It's cherry picked. You find this one little spot that makes you look good, and you forget the other, you know, decades or even centuries of oppression and stupidity and anger and stuff like that.
And then next thing you know, we get Confederate flags flying at the Capitol.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but that sort of confusion, like I've talked to people about that. I'm like, okay, so we see these trucks, these Trump flags, and these Confederate flags,
Mhm.
and we see billboards that these people love to see, like, the Democratic Party was the party of slavery and all this stuff, while they're Republicans saying they're party of Lincoln, flying a Confederate flag.
Yeah, exactly.
It blows my mind, man. Like, I
Yeah.
can't reconcile it, and I think there's larger issues. I've spoke about this, when I was a kid growing up, man. There's, they have, I think, a pickle festival at Atkins and a grape festival at Altus, and they have a peach festival at Clarksville. And on the town square, and they probably still do. I'm going to go back this year and look. When I was growing up at the peach festival, they sold Confederate memorabilia in mass. Rings, flags, hats, shirts, you name it, wallets.
The whole event's been more subdued lately, but they always call it garbage galore on 64.
Yeah.
Like early August, Arkansas, you get people set up tables, and we've had flag and memorabilia. I've seen them. If I remember right, I usually see them out like East Main Street. Some of those big vacant lots they'll set up and be selling and stuff. But yes, I think there's debates right now about how we teach history. People are talking about, like, what is it? Is it the 1619 project? I can't remember the numbers. Others have said we got to, teaching U.S. history, it's got to be all positive and show us in a good light. I mean, this is a huge challenge, I always say to my classes, the United States might be the best country in the world, but we can always be doing better. And if you don't look at the realities and the real problems, you're getting a fake version of it, a really problematic version of it. And I think, because the honest truth is, when you get in that classroom, your students may have to confront uncomfortable truths. This is part of being, the accent should give it away. I'm a Yankee. My ancestors were not even in this country during the slavery and segregation era. They emigrated about the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. So I have no stake or skin in the segregation game or the Civil War game. Whereas if you're from Arkansas, your family may have to confront the cold reality of that your great-great-great-grandfather may have been revolted against the United States, may have took up arms to destroy this more perfect union. If your great-grandfather may have been an active segregationist, if you're from Arkansas, and Caucasian. I think that kind of goes without saying, but just to make sure, that is very uncomfortable. But it's, how you have to engage that, because it's part of history. But it's trying to engage it in a way that is not accusational. We are not the sins of our great grandfathers. And it's trying to get people to look at that, to understand it, to realize that, there are still major effects of slavery in the United States. Even 150 plus years after the end of the Civil War. It's trying to find ways to get them to see it and engage with it in any meaningful way. That, to me, is what we're always, what we're striving for, and it's a hell of a challenge.
It is, man, but it's one I enjoy undertaking in the classroom. I do. Yeah. I was doing a slavery in Arkansas research project, and for my Arkansas history class, now I do slavery in the United States project as well. And with that course, we're going to be starting chapter 2 next week, and that's going to get into first slaves arriving, and that'll be like, right now we're doing pre-contact native cultures, European exploration. But the very next thing is Africa, triangular slave trade.
Yeah.
Or triangular trade network, Atlantic slave trade, all of that. But it's it's a thread that it's persists all the way through the civil rights movement. One thing like that
Oh yeah.
more recent historians of point have been making is like, you know, we're seeing the continuation of the civil rights movement
Yes.
in many ways. And it does there. This is a remark I've heard several historians make. It's kind of after Martin Luther King died, after he was assassinated, getting into the 70s at Vietnam ends and things just kind of fizzled out, right? But it wasn't like it was because of mass equality and everybody was happy. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I have always, you know, kind of observed that, like, hey, what happened to the civil rights movement? Where did it go? Is it done? And I would say now we're seeing with 2020 that there's still work to be done.
I would certainly agree. I think when I've taught social movements and mass movements in American politics, I think you hit on one of the issues. There's not the dynamic generational leadership anymore. Martin Luther King Jr. absolutely transformed that movement. He was able to articulate it, express it in any venue, whether a speech, in the halls of power, etc. Once he is assassinated and off the scene, you've had a lot of people strive to be the next leader, but I don't think you've had the same level of success. I will be really fascinated to see. We're starting to see better organization of communities of color. I think one of the big ones, Stacy Abrams. She is the African-American woman from Georgia who really has organized Georgia's Democratic voters politically. She effectively flipped Georgia for Biden. She then turned around a day later and helped win 2 Georgia Senate seats for the Democrats. She is single-handedly the organized that state's political apparatus. The issue is that is awesome. You almost need what Martin Luther King did. He organized really all African Americans, but lots of sympathetic Caucasians as well. What you need, if you really want a new civil rights movement, you need that kind of dynamic leadership, in the same way as Martin Luther King, to bring these issues to the forefront, to move about change. And you've just been missing that since the late 60s. Mm-hmm. Social movements with a leader are just far more effective. You can look at Gandhi in India, for instance, for international parallel.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I've thought about that a lot recently, like sort of what I believe Kennedy referred to as the great man theory of government, right? That basically movements and progress and things of that nature are inspired by great leaders, by great people who they're better than the average person. They're more adept. And I'm like, yeah, I don't really believe that. That's how I personally feel about it, right? Like, oh no, our institutions should be good enough, or however you want to interpret it. But that's one way. He had one way of looking at it. That's again, yeah. It's like I've heard JFK say that multiple times. But I do get what you're saying. It's like we're absent of that, and I do think that is definitely a factor. But as we as a society, I wonder if that will change anytime in the future.
I certainly hope so. I think, and here's the way I would clarify. I'm going back. This is an older lesson I haven't done for a while, because social movements got folded into another chapter. Basically, this older textbook, when you look at what makes a successful social movement, you needed 5 things. It's a recipe. And, you need a good cause, those sorts of things. Leadership is one of those 5 things. You know, you can have the best leader in the world. If you don't got the other four, you know, you're not going anywhere. So I don't think it's essential, you know, it is not necessary. You know, what is it? Necessary and sufficient. I can't remember that right now. But it's, you know, good, dynamic, strong, articulate leadership will help your movement. You know, think about it. There's lots of movements and lots of debates. You don't have great leadership for it. It's just going to be okay, be marginalized, you know, that sort of thing. So again, when I teach American government, it's simple. Yes, we're the greatest country in the world, but we can always be better. And there's always a really long to-do list. At any point, you need, you know, government to do and fix 50 things. And, you know, a good leader will help you get up that list.
And maybe we learned our lesson about reality star TV host not being a good leader. I don't know.
Yeah, if you want a contrast, I think you shared it too. Former Governor Schwarzenegger's video.
Oh, people were ripping on that too. Did you see some of the comments? I got a couple of snarky.
No, comments got weird. I've had a couple of those. You know, somebody hijacking threads and stuff like that. But no, it's, you know, the trick is, you know, we need competent leaders. You know, which party will win every election? The political party which actually gets things done.
Yeah.
Get rid of COVID, get the economy going again, lower some healthcare costs, and you're going to crush everybody at the ballot box. You know, you can do those three things over the next 4 years. You're going to win the Electoral College like 450 to, you know, 70.
Well, you know, and something else I think that we will see some relief on. Cora's been following this more closely than I have, but student loans.
Oh, I am waiting to refinance my mortgage to see what happens with student loans.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, my family, we've been very fortunate. We've been able to keep making our payments. But it's, yeah, I think on mine, I'm paying my student loans for another long time. This was one area where the current administration failed.
Yeah.
I was eligible, and like many others turned down. They have a special program for veterans and those who've served their state and government positions to have their student loans forgiven. I qualified. I applied like 30,000 other people. They only gave 13 out. They were sued over that. Exactly. But it's, you know, if there would be student debt relief, like the gist is like Danielle's student loans, my wife's, she's not too far from paying off. I think I figured it out. I think she's within like 3 or 4 years. But if they forgive $10,000 or so, even the smallest amount I've heard, her student loans might go away in 2021.
Yeah.
Because they were saying with all these stimulus checks and funds and all that sort of stuff, the best stimulus, like, you know, get rid of student loans, and all of a sudden, whatever you're paying into student loans goes, you know, magically away. You know, that's all of a sudden.
I know. And you mentioned healthcare. That's what got me thinking about that. But those two things for a lot of Americans, a lot of people, I mean, from me to you, from my generation to your generation, and people want to argue that it, you know, no, you can't do that. It's bad, conservatives. But it's like, you know, I pay like $1,200 a month, dude, because I want to get done with it, you know?
Yeah.
And I would be putting that back into the economy some other way. I would become involved with other business ventures, or I would invest that money, or I would do something with it, you know? Yeah. And I think that is the argument for yeah, this would stimulate the economy.
Yep. Because I think combined, I think we pay about $700 a month on student loans.
Yeah.
And if one of those went away, all of a sudden, here's $300 extra a month that we can be spending locally. Like, you know, my stimulus check stimulated the local economy. I went and bought a new fridge.
Yeah.
Because the Magic Chef fridge that came with the house, it's great. It's awesome. It's now a beer fridge. But, when you're looking at a fridge that might be your age, don't want to take a chance of something going wrong.
Yeah, Cora and I have been slowly but surely replacing all of our appliances. We got a new stove when we first moved in, but we recently got a new fridge. Man, she's all over it. Dishwasher's all we got left.
Yeah, that's the one thing about a lot of this with the pandemic. We are in uncharted territory. You are finding out on the fly. They're making it up as they go. No, I mean, this is literally Great Depression kind of era. Throw on top of it the, Spanish flu outbreak on top of World War I, kinds of levels of stuff going on. And it's tough. You got to make decisions. You got to make a choice for better or for worse. So it's really difficult for government to navigate, whether it's the federal government, state government, or local governments. So far it looks like we're staying open. Cross fingers, and even though like Pope County's cases have soared the last couple of weeks.
Conway County has too. We're one of the hot spots.
Yeah. Pope County was, I saw maybe a week ago, was the worst per capita. Like Little Rock, Pulaski County, Washington County, they are always the highest. When they always put out the governor's daily briefings and the list of the top 5 counties. Well, they're always the largest because they're the most people. But Pope County, 60,000, has like twice as many cases per capita. And now I am trying to not get my hopes up too far. Hoping, vaccines might be around the corner.
Are you not able to get vaccine through the college?
Oh yeah. But it's like one of those, I am superstitious. This is an old Army superstition. If you get dropped off somewhere, you don't spend time looking at the helicopter coming to get you, and you don't look at the helicopter leaving on its way out. Just because when you're so close, you don't want to have a slip up. You don't, when you see the end the light at the end of the tunnel, you got to keep that discipline going. You got to keep the masks on. You got to keep the distance. Because you don't want to screw up right before relief is there. So it's like they're starting to take information. It's my suspicion when it comes time to get vaccinated, you're going to get like an email saying, hey, we got vaccinations. You need to be here tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. Drop everything you're doing, come get it. But they're starting to collect information like that at Tech to get everybody, because that's a big difference. Higher education in Arkansas, we're in the list. I have a couple of friends who are professors in Florida. They're just considered rank and file general public, and they are being required to do mass classes without social distancing. Like, imagine teaching your history classes in a crowded auditorium of 150 students shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah. That's
so I'm just trying to stay patient, stay cool, with a little luck sometime in spring. Our understanding is if everything goes the way it's supposed to, we should be inoculated this spring.
They're starting to do the vaccines for our employees like next week.
I think they've hit public safety. They've hit the, health center. But for the history lesson, though, we're talking the largest public health initiative since trying to cure polio.
I thought about that.
Yeah. I mean, you literally need to get 330 million Americans inoculated. And I've seen the pictures, there's Elvis getting his, polio shot in like 60 or 61 or something like that. But he got it like on national television and stuff like that to show it's safe. And if Elvis is doing it, so should I.
How often Are you going to need to get the vaccine annually?
I don't know about that. That's the it seems like you got to get 2 doses. I know that.
Saw that.
I'm not sure because even with normal vaccination schedules and stuff, you have to get revaccinated. Like I mean, Danielle and I were. I mean, everybody's vaccinated for like measles, mumps, rubella now. We had to get, I think, had to get a booster shot of it when we went to have Paige, um, which would put me in my early 30s and Danielle in her late 20s. And it was just because they realized that this booster was supposed to be for life, but it only lasts about 10 years. So they're like, okay, if I told you, hey, you got to get a COVID booster every 5 years or every 10 years, I don't think people have a problem with that. If it's like flu shots, we'll see and stuff like that. But yeah, this is, a huge endeavor that on a scale we haven't seen in decades.
Yeah.
So, and using, I mean, the inoculations is like brand new technology. You got to keep it like at 70 below zero until you're ready to use it and stuff like that. So, for many of the vaccines.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I've been seeing some people are like, yeah, my arm hurts. Some people get COVID-like symptoms for 12 hours or something. One guy said his first shot made him feel, and he'd had COVID like several months ago. But he said his first shot made him feel like he had COVID for 11 hours and the second shot for like 15 hours or vice versa.
That's yeah. I've heard a lot of people that the first shots, I mean, if you get a flu vaccine, you feel, a little bit the next day or whatever. I mean, I never had like a bad reaction. But yeah, I've heard the same thing. One of your guests, Kelly Jones, our Arkansas historian, her mother is a nursing down there in Conway. She has gotten both her doses. And she said the first was like nothing. The second, yeah, you have a day or so where you feel like you've got COVID symptoms. Now, I think her employer told her to plan to have 2 days off after you get your second dose. Just so you can sit down, relax, you can let that go through you while it kicks in.
Yeah.
But it's figuring stuff like that out. And then, of course, you get the challenge, like those people who are going to choose to not get inoculated. More power to you, but thanks, but no thanks. So, and how you handle them, what do you do, if anything?
Yeah. Well, I do get that some people have some concern. It's like, the vaccine being as new as it is, that makes some sense. I mean,
yeah,
we were telling people opiates were great for a long time, and now we know they're not. Yeah. So, and I'm not comparing the vaccine to opiates, but I'm just saying I would like more, and I realize we can't. It's not a luxury that we can have right now. But it would be nice if it was like we were like, there's been 2 years of trials,
Yes.
That would make, I think, a lot of people feel more comfortable. But I do see that as a legitimate concern. In one of these, I think it's Pfizer, and I haven't seen this shared. Somebody said something. I did a little bit of research about it, and it may not be Pfizer. It may be the other one. Have had a lot of lawsuits filed against them for different side effects from medicines. Again, they're a pharmaceutical company. It makes sense. It's like, so that happens. Sometimes you create a bad batch, or, John Jones's creatine has, whatever male enhancement pills in it, whatever it is. But so mistakes can be made. And
yeah. Well, that's why I don't know how much like regular TV you get to watch, but if you watch sports, they're selling all kinds of drugs. Like you just said, natural male enhancement. But they're selling stuff for heart disease and liver disease and cancer treatments. And near the end, though, they string off all these possible side effects. And all it takes is one person in tens of thousands
that's a
to
great
have
point.
that one side effect. This is a bioethics question. What level of safety are you comfortable with? Because I think this comes up in some things like national security policy. I'm thinking deep here. Oh, vaccinating people against smallpox?
Yeah.
You can do it. Now, normal immunizations, you're going to have one bad reaction about every 200,000 to 250,000 doses, which for a country as big as the United States is pretty small. The trouble is with smallpox, that rate is like 1 in 50 or 1 in 60. So that's just way, because that happened right after 9/11. People are scared of terrorists. They're worried about a biological weapon. They say, what if, somebody starts spreading, smallpox? We've got a vaccine, but it would have been so damaging just vaccinating people that they said, no, this doesn't make any sense. But that's a whole, and it's again, if you get a rash on your back for 3 days, but you're safe from COVID, I'll take it.
Yeah.
So that's part of what this is. We're all you're going to learn a lot about it by putting it into the field.
That is a great point, man, because I mean, shoot, you and I both know a ton of people that have already taken it. I do. I know a bunch of people that have taken it, and I've seen people that I don't know and talk to all the time that have taken it, that just on social media, that are more abroad than here locally. But I know a lot of people locally, healthcare people, people at the gym, through the gym. I mean, probably a couple of dozen, and nothing that would be alarming. And I haven't heard. I know originally, and I think they were false stories. But originally, when the vaccine first dropped, people were putting out this narrative that it caused you to have palsy in your face. There were some social media posts and this, and I verify from my end where I was looking it up as they weren't true. But then I saw another one. I didn't go back and look, but I just assumed that it was also not true. So,
but there's the trouble you get into is, you were smart. You heard information online. You went to look and verify it. The problem is how many millions of Americans, and this will circle us back to the politics, wouldn't do that. I hear this vaccine turns you European, so I'm not going to take it. Where'd you hear that?
YouTube,
Reddit forums, yeah. All that kind of stuff. It's why, I think Reddit's or YouTube has started taking down stuff like some of the anti-vaxxer stuff. I know they've gone after election conspiracy theory stuff. Because the reality is, it's one thing if you don't get to hear Joe Rogan and Lenny Clark tell a drug-addled stand-up comedy story, but it's another when people are making there's got to be a joke. If you are making your entire medical decisions based on YouTube, you might want to reconsider those options. But here's the trouble: people are actually doing that, and it can have really harmful effects. Because I think that's one thing I'm catching is once you're vaccinated, you might be able to carry COVID, but you won't have symptoms. You could be dripping COVID, and you'll never feel it. You'll never know it. So what happens is once you get to certain levels, the danger is going to be when you get to 60 or 70% immunities, those 30% who have elected not to better be really careful about who they're around.
Yeah, here's something else I was curious about. I've been exposed. I mean, we're exposed at the same time that one time. But I've been exposed 3 times.
You're a little closer than me.
Yeah. 3 times now. And I've wondered, and I'm not banking on it, but I've wondered, it's do I have some sort of immunity, or maybe I got it and I was asymptomatic?
Yep.
But here's another curiosity I've had about COVID is, let's say I had it and I was asymptomatic.
Mm-hmm.
Logical, but we don't know. But we do know that people get it and are asymptomatic. What about when they get it again and again and again? Are they
Yeah.
going to be asymptomatic every time, or is it going to get worse every time?
So far, at least what I have run into, there are not that many people who have had it fully twice. Um, you and I are both, I know I'm living, I had it, I've got my positive test, so I'm living that antibody life. The issue is, I don't know how long.
90 days is what I've heard.
Right. I think, yeah, me and Cora are on the exact same calendar. But it goes longer. My brother's in California. He caught it in late March, early April, and he still has some level of antibodies. He's still giving plasma to donate because they use that in those who people have caught COVID, and now he's probably at 9 months later.
That's good. That's good news.
Yeah, but it's one of those. I would love to be able to go and get like a bi-monthly antibody test to find out, do I still have it, that sort of thing, because like you said, you could be donating to help people out. But it seems like, and that's the problem when people start yelling about, well, let's just do herd immunity, open everything, spread it fast. Yeah, you spread it fast, but in a year or so, when it comes through for round two, it's going to be even worse.
Mm-hmm.
We're creeping up on 400,000 dead from COVID. If a second round worse than this one, once everybody's herd immunity starts to pass, that to me would sound absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, and the curiosity I've had is in the Spanish flu, for example, being remembered as something that occurred in waves.
Yes, that's
I've wondered what wave we're in, or how many more waves we have left, or if this is still the first wave, or we in third wave, second wave.
I got to think about that because there's different parts of the country who've had their own waves. Like the initial early wave, the spring 2020 wave, was a lot of the heavily populated states: California, Washington State, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. Then summer of 2020 was the southern wave. That is when Florida and Texas got really bad, but you really started to see the numbers go up throughout a lot of the southern states. Like Alabama got really bad. Georgia was pretty bad. Fall of 2020 was the Midwest. I remember this is where Wisconsin, Chicago, Illinois got bad again. But now we're getting into winter and everybody's having issues. Like you've seen Europe. I mean, they were basically fully reopened. Everybody's wearing masks for a couple of months, like September, October, November, but they're all buttoned up again. Just because it's wintertime, it's broken out again. It's not, and part of this, from a politics perspective, it's really hard to legislate what you need to keep it from spreading. You cannot have a group of more than 10 people together. Well, how many law enforcement officers are going to go knock on doors and say, how many people do you have at this child's birthday party? I need to count heads.
When how many people are going to call and report? And so the answer is some. I saw some videos of some cops giving kids hell at Fayetteville, the U of A.
Oh, yeah. Well, that happened. I remember that. It happened in Russellville. Right as we were getting back into school, somebody threw a big house party, not even associated with tech. But this is where it was obvious. There was like 50, everybody drove themselves. And there's like 50 cars parked in a residential neighborhood, like up on lawns and everything else like that. That's easy. I mean, you've seen that. New York prevented a wedding from happening. It was going to be on Long Island. There was going to be 2,000 wedding guests. And it's like, yeah, the biggest wedding I've ever been to is about 400. I don't even want to know what the hell 2000 looks like.
Yeah.
But it's how do you actually police it? You know, on private property, masks are easy. You walk into it's that store owner's prerogative. Mask, great. You know, wear it. No mask, it's up to the owner. But and you know, there's all this the cult. You know, there's groups about who's wearing masks where, what businesses are doing what, all that sort of stuff that's out there. And but it is a real policing challenge. It's how do you enforce what will keep people safe? Because that's what Arkansas's breakout in COVID cases is. It's not, you know, going to Razorback games. It's, you know, birthday parties, social gatherings, unmasked church groups, things like that. And, you know, it's really hard to engage and enforce stuff like that. You know, I think, you know, the parallel I figured out, and here's what it's for you to think about this weekend. I compare it to drunk driving. A lot of people drink, get behind the wheel. Same thing with COVID. I can go out there, I might have it, I might not, I don't really know. I go about my own business. We probably know people who've never taken a precaution, who are stupid, have never caught COVID, have not spread it. I know plenty of people who followed every single possible precaution, wind up catching it anyway. But it's the same, you know, how do you prevent or stop drunk driving? It's a lot of the same idea. You know, people are going to do it. Some people will get away with it. Others are going to have accidents. Others are going to hurt others. It seems to me that there's some kind of parallel between the way we try and prevent drunk driving to the same way we prevent sort of these dangerous, destructive behaviors of COVID spreading. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It is. It's a tough. What I'm interested to see later on down the road in my lifetime is, in the era that we live in, what sort of modifications we take for the future. Mm-hmm. Because this is something that, you know, I've heard the word unprecedented thrown around more in the last year. And yeah, there've been some crazy things, but it's like, similar things have happened. And I felt like we could have been more prepared as a country, you know, and could have acted differently in certain areas.
Yeah. It's, you know, let's take a closer history, the last 10 years. You've got the anti-vaxxer movement in the United States. And what have you've started to see a lot of diseases which do not have to exist in the United States return. Measles, mumps, I think have shown up in Arkansas. Mm-hmm. Particularly with Northwest Arkansas, if I remember correctly. You know, but the United States is a more individualistic society. We put and allow individuals a lot more freedom to make their own choices. And, you know, choosing to get inoculated in the United States is a choice. But the issue is it spreads, like you see, with those diseases out of control. I would not be surprised if there is some manner of either requiring it more or limitations if you don't have your vaccinations or something like that in response to this.
Like flying, stuff like that.
What's that?
Flying, travel. I bet they will restrict that under the Biden administration.
Anywhere that you might become a super spreader yourself. You know, if we got to make everybody get COVID vaccines, we might as well get everybody up to date on everything else. So I think that's one thing in general. Again, it's going to be questions of public health. You know, the biggest problem for places like Arkansas is just the number of hospital beds, the number of doctors. You know, if you had an uncontrolled outbreak, you know, it could be devastating. You know, I think Clarksville's I don't know how big their hospital is. Oh, you saw this in Dardanelle this summer. When they had the really bad outbreak, June. It's they don't have a big hospital, and all of a sudden you're worried about, hey, we're almost at capacity. If you would get a really uncontrolled outbreak, how are you going to deal with that? More rural people have been yelling about rural medicine, preventive medicine for decades. Arkansas is unhealthy. Why? It's such a big state. It's a long distance to a doctor for many people. I mean, that's part of what if you drive around Russellville, part of Russellville's economy is medical providers. You're going to wind up, we got heart clinics and we got a dialysis center and we got all these things here. But if you're like from Jasper or, some of those places, you're hauling in a car 45 minutes or an hour.
True.
Trying to get better, just basic medical provision in places of a higher quality for a lot of, especially the rural areas. I think it's one thing that we should, if we are wise, start looking at and thinking about.
Yeah. That's what I was saying. Maybe on the other side of this, that'll be, and we've talked about several things this podcast: healthcare, student loans, this being a subset of healthcare, but vaccinations. Yep. I think these will be areas that, because of what's going on, that we will see improvements, and I think we will see. I personally hope to see less of an issue with there being censorship on the internet. Mm-hmm. That is, I mean, and Joe Rogan talks about that a lot, or I've heard him speak to it in the past, is extending that right into the digital space more. And, hopefully I'm holding out that we see more of that, right? Mm-hmm. That will create, in my view, and some other people's, will create a kind of, an environment where it's like, hey, we can debate about this, but without there being echo chambers popping up everywhere.
Yeah. Well, I was telling my students yesterday, like one of the, all the leaders of these big tech companies, YouTube, Google, Twitter, Facebook, they recognize they are designed to be echo chambers. I don't like this, I push it off. I like this, see more of it. They've all recognized and acknowledged that they are playing a role, but they have no ability or idea how to fix it. Mm-hmm. In what way do they force, Facebook users, hey, you're getting all these conservative stuff. Let me throw you a little bit of, liberal salt and pepper in there once in a blue moon. So that is a challenge. I mean, you're right. Everybody does it, and every social media platform is built that way. It's designed to give you and target you with advertisements for things that you want or you think you want. Mm-hmm. And it's trying to get it out of that bubble is the huge problem. Get you, like, again, if you want to go full circle to these protesters, one of the things is they all have such, you talk about these information bubbles. Theirs is like an information bowling ball with such a little tiny bit of information in and out. That's why I was reading today, there's growing discussion about, hey, these guys are acting like they're in a cult. Well, that's what cults do. They limit information. But social media may be contributing to, I can create my armor-plated bubble of QAnon conspiracy theories. But it's, the leaders of these companies recognize the problem, but it's, they don't know how to solve it.
Yeah.
So I've heard, like, Zuckerberg's the big one I've seen in particular on Capitol Hill getting up there and says, yes, this is part of our model. We give people what they want to see, or or here's the better one, what our algorithm thinks they want to see.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, man, I've thought about, and I may still do it, something to consider for the future. I thought about live streaming the inauguration.
I'm not sure if it's a real inauguration or a virtual one, or how it's.
It'd be, I mean, I'm interested to see what goes on for sure.
Oh, yeah. Oh, there's going to be 4,700 camera crews from every network in DC. I think it's actually going to be bad because it's going to be some idiot going, I'm standing on a street corner. Nothing is happening.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's, it'll be interesting. I mean, as much, I don't know, anxieties. I think there are some anxieties that surround the event, like we're talking about.
Oh, certainly, yes.
And I'm not like wanting to tune in just to see if something bad happens, but it's a historic event and something that I'm trying to gather intel. This will be, in 20 years as a historian, when I talk about this.
Oh, yeah.
It'll be a little different. It'll be like,
Oh, that certainly is part of it. Like I've been, thinking about that as well. You need some clarity, you need some distance. And there's just, when you teach history though, the interesting thing is there's some presidencies who just get ignored. And it's not that they're boring or they're anything. It's just that you only have so much space.
Yeah.
And it's like, I feel bad. I barely, like Bush 41, I barely touch it in my classes. You get a lot of Reagan, you get a lot of Clinton. He's the transition between the two, but it's like some get ignored, but there's certain things about the current climate that I know are going to be part of the class forever. Social media presidencies. It started, they called President Obama was the first Facebook president. And then President Trump has been, up until a week ago, called like the Twitter president. Because social media is this, is this powerful tool. You can reach your followers and your like-minded individuals with no filters. Now, whether or not that's a good or bad thing, we'll leave that to the individual. But that's like, that's been part of my course. If you are going through the traditional media, you get Billy Reeder back here. Billy Reeder does a interview with President Trump. The interviewer's got to write it up, and then he'll have an editor behind him, a producer if it's television who can edit it or use it in different ways and stuff like that. And then it gets to air. So it's gone through multiple stages, multiple hands. Whereas it's with social media, it's a direct conduit. Your thoughts go straight from your brain to your thumbs out there into the world. And I think, particularly you've seen that. Why did President Trump get 74 million votes? Because he was able to communicate that way with those of his, same political persuasion. But likewise, there was Democrats were big on social media. They were raising money hand over fist. And that's how, Biden got 81 million votes. They're able to cut out a lot of the mass media and really get to people directly.
Yeah, I will say, I am not a Trump supporter, but I was surprised that he did not win. And I'm not saying that's not evidence for fraud, but I was like, oh man, this dude's about to win again. Like that's how I was feeling about it. And even that first, like the morning going in when they hadn't called it, I was just looking at it and I was like, looks like this dude's gonna win again, And then when he didn't, I was like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I guess this is what that's surprising. I was surprised.
Well, that was the thing. I know Cora had a great post about it when you realize that some of these counties are so large. Like I found out my brother actually lives in Los Angeles County, population 10 million.
Yeah. Arkansas and Oklahoma combined population size in one county.
Exactly. But everybody suddenly becomes a subject matter expert on Pennsylvania election law, Georgia election law. Like, that's part of what you should be doing is you'll learn about, so what happened in Pennsylvania? Okay, the Republicans made a rule for whatever reason that they're only going to start counting votes mail in on Wednesday morning. And there was one county with more than 1 million mail-in ballots sitting there. Just like they had their logic, they overrode the governor's veto of that idea. But congratulations, it's going to take you 4 extra days to count literally all those votes. But it was definitely a bizarre. This election should, I think Biden won. It's definitely closer than I would have expected. In hindsight, I was a little surprised by Georgia. I think that's the big one when you start to see, but it's easier to see in hindsight. That's always,
100%.
When I thought about that's part of, I still have to redo my lecture on presidential elections. And part of it is I ask, so what the hell happened? And I've been working to try and figure out how to answer that. And there's a couple of things. COVID required a huge change of strategy. And I don't think President Trump really did. Mm-hmm. He loves his campaign rallies. He loves those big events. They really helped him in 2016. He just couldn't have them in 2020. He went from going to like the Dallas Cowboys Stadium, having 100,000 people there, to he was doing a municipal airport a half mile from my mom's house with like 10,000 people. It just doesn't have the same effect. He needed to adapt more than he did. Yeah. But we're also in the era of negative partisanship. It's not that I'm voting for Joseph Biden. A lot of people are voting against Donald Trump. And part of it, though, is this is the same line. But I think if you want people to understand better, we share a lot of the same friends. We know a lot of the same conservatives. They were saying the exact same thing in 2016. I'm not a fan of Donald Trump, but man, I hate Hillary Clinton. Yeah. You're getting the same thing. Donald Trump is the same thing on the Democratic side. And then part of it, too, is Donald Trump shot down. This was going to be a mail-in election in every state. And how many times in the election, mail-in voting is fraudulent. He drove down his own turnout numbers.
True. Very true.
So it's like those three things. And any one of those he could have overcome. You put all three together and you wind up with the electoral college margin is not as large. It's the same thing as 2016. President Trump won in 2016 by only about 250,000 votes spread into certain states. You lose 20,000 here, 30,000 there. Nevada was really close. Georgia was razor thin. There were a lot of narrow margins. Now he got blown. He got beat pretty good in Michigan. He got beat pretty good in Pennsylvania. But with those differences, it was closer than expected. But I got to wrap it up.
Yeah, me too, man.
I gotta go pick up the Russellville Strangler at school.
All right, dude. Well, hey, thanks so much for contributing to the podcast yet again.
You're welcome.
It's great to just have somebody to talk to about this stuff, man. So, appreciate it.
It definitely is. It's weird. It's very strange.
Well, you're the resident political scientist, man. We got
that reminds me. I'm going. I got a new gig. I think I start Tuesday. It won't be every week, but I'm going to start dropping in on River Valley Now.
Cool.
You've seen Sass and the Beard. They're bringing on some others. They brought on one guy, Cody. Cody goes to a lot of the Pope County Republican meetings. They're bringing me on to talk about some of this stuff as well. So I'm what's the key? I'm expanding my digital presence.
You're a pundit, man.
Oh God, right. Lord help you all. All right, take care.
Hey, see you, man. Have a good one.
You too.